I'm now going to turn the mic, after the introduction, over to Dr. Stephen Hinshaw. Dr. Hinshaw, some of you may have met him. He was doing a book signing of his most recent book, which is really his call to arms about overcoming the stigma associated with youth mental health. Dr. Hinshaw holds two positions. One, he's a professor of psychology at UC Berkeley, and he's also co-chair of the psychiatry department at UC San Francisco. He earned his undergraduate degree from Harvard and his doctorate in clinical psychology from UCLA. Dr. Hinshaw has published over 10 books and hundreds of research papers on a variety of youth mental health subjects, ranging from the explosion in ADHD in this country to the challenges and pressures faced by today's teenagers. He's going to talk to you tonight as a member of the Scientific Advisory Board for AIM for Mental Health, which is composed of 11 with Dr. Hinshaw, 11 of the top research scientists and doctors in the field of youth mental health, all of whom are listed on your programs. So without any further ado, I would like to call Dr. Stephen Hinshaw to the stage, and he's going to talk to you about what they're doing, what the scientists in this country are doing about youth mental health, and how we can help them through AIM for Mental Health. Stephen, please join me.
Welcome to the AIM Gala. I'm first delighted to be here on behalf of the Scientific Advisory Board of AIM. And as you can read in the program, its members include Drs. Bradley Peterson, David Clark, Barbara Kornblatt, Hillary Blumberg, James Locke, Matt State, John Weiss, Katie McLaughlin, Ed Craighead, and David Miklowitz. They represent collectively Harvard, Oxford, UCLA, UC Berkeley, UC San Francisco, Hofstra University, Stanford, University of Washington, Emory, and Yale. These people perform state-of-the-art work on early adversities leading to mental health conditions, genetic mechanisms, brain patterns, treatment trials and how to disseminate treatments, and the conditions these scientists study include ADHD, autism, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, substance abuse, suicide, self-harm, and many more. As we know, there's a growing epidemic of youth and young adult mental health conditions. It's a tribute to Susan Stilwell and AIM for assembling this board dedicated to finding the cures and developing, promoting, and disseminating evidence-based treatments. Now, I'm here also with a different kind of representation tonight. Beyond the science I do on ADHD and kids' brains and peer groups and schools and families, my deep interest, I think, is the largest issue confronting the entire mental health field, which is the shame and stigma that still exist. It's still hard to talk about these issues. It takes brave groups like AIM to get public attention on these issues. The U.S. population today knows much more about mental health than in the silent 50s and early 60s. But attitudes haven't budged, and in fact, more people today inevitably link mental illness with violence than in 1955. Our knowledge is growing, but our attitudes aren't budging. You didn't used to put cancer in the obituary of your loved one who died from it because it was a shameful illness you brought on yourself. Today, cancer is a cause. The NFL behemoths wear pink knee socks 2 Sundays every fall. But mental health is still in silence. My book is called Another Kind of Madness. Let me tell you where I got the title. The inspiration comes from a quote from James Baldwin in one of his masterpieces, Giovanni's Room. People who remember court madness through pain, the pain of the perpetually recurring death of their innocence. People who forget court another kind of madness, the madness of the denial of pain and the hatred of innocence. And the world is mostly divided between madmen who remember and madmen who forget. I cannot, of course, claim to comprehend all of Baldwin's experiences, but his words are inspirational. For the present narrative, as I try to make clear, stigma and shame are another kind of madness, a form with consequences that are far worse than any link to mental illness itself. More broadly, stigma fosters a denial of human potential. The silence and shame must be transformed into open dialogue. Until we make progress toward this goal, we will never realize what we can become as a species. So that's the title of the book, Another Kind of Madness, which is a deeply personal story of my father and our family leading to my scientific career. So let me read a little bit more about how this story starts. In the late summer of 1936, scalding winds scoured the Southern California region. As the calendar reached September, the 16-year-old known as Junior couldn't shut off the voices now shouting inside his head. Preoccupied with the growing Nazi threat in Europe, day and night he roamed the sidewalks of Pasadena, the same ones that had carried him to grade school on his metal roller skates a decade before. Begging him to save the free world, the voices grew in intensity each day. Desperate to emerge with a plan to save the world, Junior continued his relentless pacing. He was the sole human with this mission. As his thoughts gathered speed, another insight emerged. Alone among mankind, he had attained the power of flight. In fact, his arms had become wings. Clearly, he's going through a growing manic episode, though no one knew it at the time. Like Icarus, if he lifted his wings to the sun, he'd be aloft. Amplified by radio accounts of the rise of the fascists, the visitors' warnings to the family home called out to him, the Nazi threat is real. How to save the earth? If not for him, the fascists might prevail. As the early morning winds of September 6th inched toward dawn, the winds abated. Finally, a brilliant yellow-orange, the sun emerged to the east. Enthralled by his energy and insights, he reached his block on North Oakland Avenue, moving furtively past a few yards to find his own home, a dark brown bungalow now directly in front of him. Breathing in, he crossed the lawn with muted footsteps. As the front door beckoned, he stared at it and then above. All was silent in the early daylight. There was no turning back, the time was now. How to ascend? Thinking fast, he nimbly scrambled up the trellis, steadying himself as he found footholds. A final thrust, and he was on the roof above the small front porch, the walkway 12 feet below. The sky loomed majestically before him, the air already torrid. Save the free world. Glory would be his. Approaching the edge, he shed his clothes and heaved them over, shoes, pants, and shirt floating to the ground beneath. Suddenly cooler, he held his breath. Calf muscles straining, arms outflung, he pushed off and propelled himself forward to save the free world. For a second, there was only the feel of air against his skin. The ground rushed toward him before everything turned black. So at 16, Dad fast escalated into an episode of mania, hearing voices, delusional thoughts, thinking he could save the world. He survived his flight. His brothers rushed out of the house and got him into the nearest public facility in Norwalk, California, where he languished for 6 months, the only treatment being tied to his bed at night to prevent wandering. He recovered 6 months later without any treatment. Sometimes happens with bipolar disorder. Went to Stanford, became a philosophy major, studied at graduate school at Princeton with Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein, but had another severe episode at age 25 as he finished his PhD. This one at Byberry State Hospital outside Philadelphia, the world's worst mental facility. While there, he believed he was being held in a concentration camp in Germany. World War II had not ended yet. He recovered again, had his PhD in philosophy, became a professor at Ohio State, met my mother, a graduate student in history. They got married, and when did Mom find out about Dad's episodes? When she became pregnant with me and pregnant with my sister. Women endure postpartum depression after pregnancy. Men with a genetic propensity to mania often become floridly manic during their partner's pregnancies, a less known fact. During my childhood and my sister's back in Columbus, Ohio, it was a great life, an idyllic life. We went to OSU football games, but Dad would disappear for 3 or 6 or 12 months at a time. What I didn't know was that his doctors had been very clear. If your children ever learn the reason for your disappearances, your mental illness, they'll be permanently destroyed. You and your wife are forbidden from ever mentioning it. So for 18 years, my first 18 years, I lived under a shroud of mystery and terror. It must have been really awful that no one could even talk about it. What do kids do when something goes wrong in a family but nobody discusses it? They tend to blame themselves. They internalize. So whatever genetic risk I have for bipolar disorder is compounded by the shame and silence. Only when I reached 18, came back from the East Coast for my first spring break, did Dad pull me aside into a study at home and say, "Son, perhaps you should learn something of my life's events." I now had a mission. I changed my major to psychology. I was going to study mental health. I later diagnosed Dad correctly with bipolar disorder, which the doctors hadn't done for 35 years. But just underneath the surface was the terror that I would probably be next to go into mental hospitals, because I didn't go back to college and tell my Harvard roommates or girlfriends anything about what I'd learned. It was too shameful. How could I become a psychologist if they knew the family curse? Until I opened up, until I got therapy, I lived under the same shroud of silence and stigma that my dad and our whole family had. What's at stake here? 90 million people in our country have or are close family members of kids and teens and young adults with serious mental illnesses. Remember, most forms of what we call adult mental health issues begin in childhood or the teen years. And childhood mental illness, most of the time, persists way beyond childhood. The paradox is that treatments really work. We don't have cures yet. We're aiming to find cures, but the evidence-based treatments that exist today, medications, individual therapy, family therapy, group therapy, have bigger effects than most of the treatments you get from your family doctor when you go in for a physical ailment. Recovery is a distinct possibility, but people are too ashamed to get access, to give themselves over for care. The ignorance and shame and stigma remain the #1 barrier. Mental health can no longer be on the back burner. We can't ignore our siblings, our kids, our nieces and nephews, our neighbors' kids, as they grow older, and let them languish without the care they need. Let me just do one more brief quote from the book's epilogue, where I take a little break from the family narrative and state a few facts. The mental health crisis remains firmly in place. 3 times more Americans die from suicide, 42,000 in 2015, the last year with solid statistics, than from homicide. But who would know of this fact from the news, which routinely features gun violence perpetrated against others, but almost never discusses the inner pain related to depression and suicidal thoughts? Around the world, suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death for people aged 15 to 44, and the leading cause of death worldwide for girls 15 to 20. Mental disorders don't afflict them, a deviant group of flawed, irrational kids or adults, but us, our parents, our sons and daughters, colleagues and associates, even ourselves. Countless veterans and trauma victims suffer from PTSD. Rates of child-onset conditions like ADHD, autism, and substance abuse are skyrocketing. Eating disorders contribute to major health risks. Substance abuse devastates lives, especially via the current epidemic of opioid and heroin-related fatalities. Chillingly, serious mental illnesses reduce life expectancy by 10 to 25 years through risky behaviors, poor exercise and health habits, proneness to chronic physical diseases, low access to health care, and self-destruction. But on average, it takes more than a decade between the recognition of symptoms and getting help. Reducing stigma, that other form of madness, far worse than mental illness itself, will take coordinated strategies, enforcement of anti-discrimination policies, access to high-quality care, a far different set of media images, personal contact that fosters more empathy, and the replacement of silence with dialogue. Above all, humanization is the goal. Getting young people engaged in the fight for human rights is central to the entire effort. Each year that we maintain our current attitudes and practices is another year of lost productivity, wasted human potential, and unspeakable tragedy. It will require an unprecedented team effort to make a difference. The knowledge is there, the pieces are in place. Do we have what it takes to mount the fight? I think we do. Thanks for hearing me. Have a great dinner. Open your hearts, open your wallets at the auction, because you'll learn what contributions can actually mean for child and adolescent and young adult mental health. Thank you so much.